When we think of historians, we think of educators working within the university system, teaching classes and conducting research in dusty old archives. However, the field of history and the careers engaged in by trained historians are wider and broader than one might think. This includes the field of public history. Public history is the practice of doing history outside the traditional classroom or academic setting. It's about how historical knowledge is created, interpreted, and most importantly, shared with the general public. But what does this look like in practice? How do historians make historical knowledge accessible to those outside of academia? I'm Patrick Needham, and you're listening to Talking History. To help us understand more about the work of public historians, we are joined by Dr. Jason Herbert. Jason holds a PhD in American history from the University of Minnesota and was named a Kentucky colonel by Governor Andy Beshear in 2022. He taught high school while writing his doctoral dissertation, then served as an ethnographer in Florida, and more recently as a tribal liaison for the United States Forest Service in Colorado. He is also the creator and host of the podcast Reckoning with Jason Herbert. And today I'm also joined by a special guest host who will be stepping in for Jean, Egyptologist Dr. Julia Troche. Talking History regulars may remember Dr. Troche from her previous appearances on Talking History. However, for those of you new to the show, Dr. Troche is an Egyptologist who teaches here at Missouri State and has also been involved in several public history projects in Missouri and has been a guest here on Talking History before. So, Dr. Troche, Dr. Herbert, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
How do in the land of my people?
Jason, you are a public historian. So what does that mean generally, and what does that mean specifically to you?
Yeah, I think that right now there's a lot of debate within academia, within history, right, about what public history is and does. As people trying to qualify this idea of, like, how are we teaching history outside of a classroom, right? And for me, I think I've always kind of conceptualized public history as everything. I think maybe the real question is, what isn't public history? Because frankly, you spend all this time thinking about history, thinking about the past in those dusty old archives and things like that. But if you're not bringing it to the people, like what was the point of this to begin with, right? The easy answer is to say anything kind of outside the traditional classroom. But you can make the argument that almost anything history-related becomes public history, whether you are conventionally working, say, in a museum or in an archive, or like myself working as a tribal liaison with the Forest Service. There's amazing public historians working, say, with the National Park Service and so forth, right? For me, what public history really focuses in on, right, it almost becomes a verb, is the engagement aspect with people who are interested in history but maybe are not specialists or something like that, who just want to know more. And that becomes, and where history becomes really this guiding vehicle for these conversations about our past, our present, and kind of where we want to be as a society moving forward.
As you know, we have students who hear this, Jason, and they want to be you. They want to be public historians one day. How do they do that? How did you get into public history, and what sort of training would you recommend that our students sort of take advantage of or follow so that they can, follow you in this career path?
Yeah, the first thing I would say is you absolutely just follow your passion. I know that's almost cliche to find. And I would tell you that I came to my career as a public historian as it really non-conventional. I kind of found it, or maybe it found me as I became a historian. I went through graduate school and really focused on different eras of history and so forth. And then over time, I was like, hey, I want to talk about this on different avenues, whether it's social media, which became this really important avenue for talking about the things that I was interested in, whether it was history or gopher tortoises down in Florida or anything else like that, right? So there's some very easy ways that you can do first and foremost, because there are a lot of amazing universities throughout the United States that offer what you would consider public history courses that have a lot of very real skill sets that translates well to, say, outside of a classroom, right? Whether it's GIS and mapping and things like that. These are real things that you can do. Like, history is actually an avenue that you can get real actual employment, right? So these are important things. Getting involved socially with there are so many scholars out there who are readily available and so happy to talk to you about their choices, their career paths, what informs them, not only as scholars, but as people. And you get to know them on a very real level. And I think in a lot of ways that kind of humanizes the position about the things that we do. Right, and then more specifically, right, there are so many different avenues. Like the actual, I really call it a lived experience, right? Experiential learning in so many different ways. When I was writing my dissertation, and now as I'm writing my manuscript, spending time doing the things that I write about. I wrote about the introduction of cattle into early Florida, and I went out and spent time in those fields and those prairies and those flatlands with the descendant herds of those cattle to kind of understand them in so many different ways. And for public history, it's like, look, you got to get involved, right? Whether you're doing an internship at a library or there are so many different summer programs that you can do if you're a student with the federal government or your state agencies. And it doesn't have to be necessarily the State Historical Society or anything like that. You can really do things like, for me, I'm working at the Forest Service. Something people don't really think is like, is that history related? But it is. And here's the thing. Everything has a history. That's the big thing. So you can take history and apply this to almost any different thing, and then that becomes like a public history thing as well. So the short answer to your question is take some courses, but follow the things you're interested in, and then listen to yourself as you're thinking. It's like, this is what I'm interested in. And then you start to talk about that. You share that on your social media and things like that. That's your entry to public history.
I want to just highlight that what you just said about collaboration with the community, because that's something in my public history class I'm teaching right now, my students brought up as how they're seeing public history is truly collaborative. And I just wanted to really highlight that idea, that community engagement and that collaboration is not just studying another culture or people, but it's really collaborating with the people that you're interacting with. And I think that was so important and so key. I wanted to highlight that.
Thank you. I think that sometimes people outside go, oh, history is about the past. History is this thing that happened. History is a thing that continues to happen. And we also, when we are writing histories or talking about the histories and so forth, we're talking about those histories oftentimes to the descendants of the people that we might be talking about and things like that. If I ask you who you are, the first thing you're going to do is tell me where you're from, right? There's a real community engagement about this idea. So if you are a student and you're like, oh, well, I'm in Springfield, I don't know what to do. There are so many different ways. And this stuff actually means things to people, right? Because you are doing a service. You're talking about legacies. You're talking about the things that inform communities about who they are and the values they hold dear. And maybe they continue to take these histories that they learn even from you and continue to shape those ideas as they move forward. So, yeah.
So, in talking about these various career paths that one could take in public history, you've taken a couple of them, and you've taken two of them kind of main ones as I see it, which is like you have the community engagement kind of public history where you're doing history in public, basically, and being a history communicator, teaching outside of the classroom. And then you're also doing like applied history, like a practical type of history with your Forest Service work and ethnography in Florida. Could you talk more about, like, I guess the separation between those two, like what you do kind of as your day job and what you do as your kind of, I mean, your podcast is more than, I guess, a hobby, but you know what I mean? You're outside of your government job, your paycheck kind of deal. Like, how do you balance those two acts, and are they related at all? Do you see the communication side bleeding into the applied side? Do you see the applied history bleeding into the communication side?
It's a great question. It's a thing I've tried to think about, and the reality is like I just no longer try to even keep anything separate, because the reality is as a historian, being a historian brings me so much joy and informs every last aspect of the things that I do. That whether I'm working as a tribal liaison and I'm meeting with tribal members out on the reservation or in the field or anything like that, or in an archive, or sending TikToks back and forth between elders, or working on the podcast where I'm trying to make these connections through film or through conversations. And really, ultimately, much of the work that I do is about self-exploration, because I got into history because I wanted to learn. And history doesn't stop learning once you get your bachelor's degree or your master's or your PhD or anything like that. It is a lifelong experience, and I think that's the fun part of it. So if the students are out there, like that's the joy. That's the part where you're constantly thirsting for this knowledge. History really informs my work with tribes. I owe it to the tribes that I work with, and the interest that they have. To do the work, right? To understand their tribal histories. And no one's expecting me to be an expert on Hickory Apache history or Comanche history or Ute history or Kiowa history. But they do expect a work, a level of effort, a labor, to understand, their place in this world and so forth, so that I've done the due diligence. I've gone out there and say, hey, tell me what I can do for you. And it's not just lip service. I've done the work. I can have these longer conversations about space, place, and belonging, right? Those are really important things. And then, as far as the podcast and so forth, this is just my desire to share this. And a lot of times I am starting to now more and more. More recently, I just had Comanche Chairman Forrest Tadanipa on the podcast. Mm-hmm. And this is because tribal members have said, hey, we would like for you to actually share some of our histories. It's okay with us. This is a thing we would like for you to do. And that was a thing that was very gratifying to me, to be entrusted as maybe a vehicle of information to non-tribal members, so I could say, hey, look at this amazing history of the Cheyenne and Arapaho people, or the Comanche people, or any number of the tribes that I work with and love. I just love the tribes so gosh darn much. So being entrusted with that means so much to me. So I do now share more and more of the work that I do because I've been asked to.
What I find fascinating and encouraging, I guess, is, I think about my own career and stuff, is that you found a way to formalize and make into a economic activity your own curiosity, yeah. which is just great. I think more people should pursue that. I think more people would find gratification in pursuing that. And I think we're all richer with people pursuing that kind of activity and sharing their findings with the world and communicating that to us all. So I thank you for your public history service.
Yeah.
And I would like to sort of tail on that, because you talked about sort of following your passion.
Mm-hmm.
And I think your current podcast has been sort of reframed as Reckoning with Jason Herbert.
Yeah.
But before that, you had Historians at the Movies. And I love, in the same way as Patrick was kind of saying, it's encouraging and inspiring, because I love movies. And I never really thought that I could engage in movies in a way that related to my academic work or into my teaching in a sort of real, tangible way. But Historians at the Movies, the watch party, has shown that you can do that. So could you speak a little bit more to Historians at the Movies, which is the way that, I think a lot of people know about you. How did that project come about, and why movies? Why do you think movies are such important, powerful vehicles for talking about history?
Yeah, absolutely. So for those of you listening, Historians at the Movies is a watch party. Every Sunday night for the last 7.5 years, myself and others have gathered virtually on the internet, first on Twitter and now on Blue Sky, to watch a movie every single Sunday night, right? And we started years and years ago with a film called National Treasure. There's an old adage that says that archaeologists and historians have beef, right? Archaeologists get Harrison Ford, they get Indiana Jones, and historians get Benjamin Franklin. We get Nicolas Cage, right? But okay, everybody loves National Treasure, and I saw it was available one night on TV, and we said we should all watch it. I didn't know what a hashtag was at the time, but I went with it, right? Because I was like, let's see what happens, right? My own curiosity, and it was great, and we had all these people come along and tweet along that night, and then just kept going every single week. And we've done hundreds of films. We're going to be doing The Goonies this coming Sunday night, actually, which is going to be a lot of fun. But what that allowed me to do over time was reconceptualize what a history movie was, right? It's not just a biopic. Lincoln is certainly a history film, but so is Trading Places, right? Mm-hmm. We get to see so much about society, and films often tell us as much about the society and the times in which they were created and marketed and produced as they do about maybe their quote-unquote subject matter or something like that. And, films become a really relevant and easy access point to talk about the past, because people have time to sit down and watch a 2-hour film or an hour-and-a-half film, and maybe they don't have the time to. And so many people understand our past through pop culture. Pop culture itself is popular culture, right? It reflects the society and its concerns and values and things like that. So that's the reason why. And, I grew up in the 80s, right? So I'm watching Star Wars, which is a history of the Galactic Civil War, and I'm watching Indiana Jones, which obviously plays so much with history and so forth. There was always a fascination with that, even at a young age, that maybe I didn't conceptualize at the time, but very much were, right? And it's fun. And that's the most important thing with Historians at the Movies. And frankly, with Reckoning, or just myself in person in general, is the one thing I want people to feel around me always is welcome. that around me, you have a space here. And I wanted to create a community with historians at the movies that no matter who you were, Sunday night, you have a spot on the couch with me and all your friends, and we're going to watch a movie together, and it's going to be a good night. You can escape for 2 hours. And that's what we did. And eventually the podcast, kind of became the next logical step. And then, frankly, over time, my own curiosity got the better of me. And I wanted to talk about more things than history and more things than movies. So we continue to talk about history and film on our Thursday episodes. But our Monday episodes are larger discussions about other different things. So that's been a real gratifying thing. But also at times you're like, hey, I'm changing the format here. I'm going to go off on this other exploration. What am I doing? And that's part of the fun. I think that's part of the lived experience of just being human. And I'm hoping people like it.
So I've got a question with regards to film and history. In all of those hundreds of films that you have put through the historical ringer, what movie had the most surprising historical subtext? Which movie did you walk away from I did not expect to get into that discussion with regards to that film?
That's such a great question, because I started to, after a little while, started to understand that so many different films were actually history movies. That I always say that almost every single movie is in fact a history film. It's hard to pick out just one, but I'll tell you that really it was Trading Places was really the first film that kind of turn my head towards what a film actually is and what it does, right? The film comes out in 1983. Most of our listeners are probably familiar with the film, right? But you get to see Philadelphia in 1983. There are jokes in there. When the first time we see Eddie Murphy, he's pretending to be a Vietnam veteran. People are talking about Vietnam at this point in time. The film itself is so much about class and race. But also, there's these questions, right? Is the film an indictment of capitalism because they're trying to get back at the really rich guys? Or is it an endorsement of the system because they're ultimately getting rich too? And the fun part is these are the conversations that you get to decide. These are the things that you get to have. And so as a historian, historians aren't here to tell you what happened. We're here to help show you, and then you get to make these decisions and you get to make these informed thoughts for yourself, right? We're more of a guide than anything else. And I think maybe that's been the fun part, is maybe curating some of these films to say, hey, look what's here that maybe you didn't see before. And I've had so many of our guests and people who tweet along with us over the years show me so many things that I couldn't begin to tell you. So it's been a process of learning myself.
Cool.
I know all of our students who are listening would love to know how you become a public historian. Do you need to get a PhD? You're talking about how historians are really there to guide you, but we need some of those methods and skills and knowledge in order to know how to guide. But does it require that credential, or are there other ways that people can get involved in public history projects without necessarily having a PhD in history or a PhD in public history?
Yeah, totally. The first thing I would tell you is that everyone is a historian of their own experience, right? Mm-hmm. Everyone has their own family stories that they can probably recall. If you're listening right now, you probably know the stories that your grandparents have told you about their own childhood, or about some soup recipe when you get sick or something like that. These are actual histories. These were oral histories that have been handed down to you. Whether or not you know it, you're actually already a practicing historian. You're already involved in that legacy. You don't necessarily need advanced degrees in quote-unquote public history or anything like that. If you want to get involved, there are so many different places you can donate your time to, whether it's your local museum, your archive, your library, that people doing just amazing work telling these stories. So you can do those things if you just, but if you want to go all in, first and foremost, follow your passion. If you like whatever type of history, go get that, right? Get your bachelor's degree, right? Read as much as you can, and don't just read the stuff that's necessarily directly related to your work. I like to read all over the place just to keep things. So I'm constantly reading. If you're not reading hundreds of books over your life, it's hard to understand the human experience, right? I'm
going to put you on the spot, Jason. Do you have any books you would like to recommend for any of us if we're interested in history, or just what's a book that you read recently that you just thought was really fun?
Oh my gosh!
You can just say no, cut.
Cut for a second, because now I have to think on this for a second. All right, hit me again.
Jason, I want to throw this question to you a bit on the spot, but you're talking about some of the books that you're reading. Can you recommend what's a book that you've read that really engages with history in a creative way, or just something you found really fun and just an enjoyable read?
Okay, so let me throw you a curveball here because it's not in my quote unquote field, right? But there was a book that came out a couple years ago called Women in the Valley of the Kings, which is women Egyptologists in the 19th century. And we talk about history and movies, and this thing reads like a film. I was casting the film as I was writing. It was written by a scholar named Kate Shepard. She's absolutely amazing. She's a professor at Missouri S&T University, and that kind of blew me away because I haven't done any reading on Egyptian history or women Egyptologists. And here's the thing: women oftentimes in histories getting written out of the histories. So it was so amazing to see a scholar writing about these incredible women in such a vibrant manner. It was like watching a film unfold as I turned pages. So I would tell you, Women in the Valley of Kings would probably be the one I would say.
I would second you on that. I agree completely.
Yeah,
I'm putting that on my list right now. Back to your point, I mean, I believe we've been doing this show for approaching 2.5, 3 years at this point, and I do not have an advanced degree in history. I sit here every month and I talk to people who are far smarter than I am and far better educated than I am about topics that are often above my head. But, I'm still, I guess, engaged in public history as a layperson. And so,
Absolutely.
I mean, just to give my view on that to any prospective future public historians out there that are listening, or to listeners who may just wanted to dip their toe in this, and it is just about following your passion. It's about being curious, about chasing those rabbits down the hole and seeing where it takes you, and letting new information permeate your life and change the way that you see the world and how you experience it. And I think that we're all richer whenever we allow ourselves to do that. So I listener, encourage you to engage with your local public historian, be it at the museum, the archive, the library, or on campus. I think that's about time for us this month. Dr. Herbert, thank you so much for joining us. And Dr. Troche, thank you for stepping in for Gene this month. That was a lot of fun.
Me.
Yeah, it's really great to be here.
Thank you, listener, for joining us for Talking History. This has been a presentation of KSMU and the Missouri State University Department of History. You can catch us the first Thursday of every month at 12:06 after NPR News, and this show is available along with our entire back catalog at ksmu.org or wherever podcasts are found. Again, our guest this month is Dr. Jason Herbert, and you can find his podcast, Reckoning with Jason Herbert, online, same places. Thank you all.